Today we're going to make one of the projects from my latest book, which is Sewing Room Accessories. And with this book, I wanted to create projects that the person who sews can sew for themselves. Or if you know somebody who sews, then you can make things for them as well. So there are lots of storage ideas, lots of places to stick your pins and things to carry your tools and equipment around with you if you're going to classes and things like that. So all in all, I had a load of fun making this, but I think I've created lots of projects that I'd like to use myself. And there's things like the little bucket storage. There's an overarm storage. I think this is really pretty. So it goes over the arm of your armchair, but it's got like a rose pin cushion in the centre, which you could make as a little independent pin cushion on its own if you wanted to. There's a couple of sewing machine covers, and there's a case like this as well. But what we're going to make in this video is the sewing circle. And this is it. So it's ever so easy. It's just a little pouch with a pocket on the inside that you can hang up, so you can keep your little sewing bits and bobs and notions, scissors and ribbons and things like that in there. But of course it doesn't have to be just for somebody who sews. You could quite easily make this for a bedroom or a bathroom or even a kitchen or wherever you like. So let's get started. So the first thing that you need to do is to cut out your circles of fabric, which I've already done here. So I've got one circle for the outside, one for the front, one for the back, and then two for the lining as well. And on the back of the outer pieces, I've put some fusible fleece on the back. This is an iron-on polyester type of wadding or batting. If you've got just a regular wadding or batting, then that's fine. Just use a little spray adhesive to hold that in place. So we'll put one of those to one side for the moment. This is how the front is going to look. So that's my lining, and the lining kind of folds back on itself like so. So when I put the two together, let me just show you how it works. I've already put a crease mark across here where I want the opening to be as well. That's how we're going to look. Now on the original little pouch, I've got 3 flowers to one side, but this time I'm just going to put 1 flower right in the centre, just to show you that you can bring the changes a little bit. And I've also cut out the pocket piece, and that's just folded in half. I'm going to trim that with a piece of ribbon. So this is how we do it. You'll need some embroidery thread, a tool to mark your fabric with. So I've made a 2-inch circle here. Find the centre spot of the circle and divide that into 5 sections. Then I'm going to take some embroidery thread or some strong thread, and I'm just going to sew those 5 lines in the centre. Alright, so I'll come up from behind. I've already got a knot in the end of the thread. Then I'm going to go across to the next line and back to the centre. Oops, keep that nice and flat. Use, if you can, the same colour thread as your ribbon, because then if you do happen to see some of the thread, it's not going to stand out. Okay. Oh, and the marking tool that I've used, by the way, to make this circle and the lines is a friction pen. So the ink will disappear with heat. You could use an air or a water erasable pen, or just some fabric chalk. Just something that's going to disappear afterwards. Right, then you'll need a large-eyed needle and a long piece of ribbon. So thread the ribbon through the needle, and then we're going to go from the back of the fabric through the centre of your pin wheel. And this may be a little bit difficult to pull through initially, but persevere, it will work. I'm not going to knot the ribbon on the back of the flower. I shall hand sew that when I've finished, because if you tie a knot in the ribbon, then it's just going to make a lump on the outside, and we don't want that. Okay, and then I'm using the back of the needle because it's not sharp, and we're going to weave in and out of those spokes. And as you're weaving, the ribbon will want to twist. That's fine, you can allow it to twist, and that's what actually makes the ribbon look a little bit more petal-like. So just pull that into the centre, and I'm going to carry on weaving around and around until the whole area is filled up. Then when I've finished, I'll take the end of that thread, the ribbon back through the fabric again. Give it a good hard pull. Like so. So I'm going to trim away the ends of the ribbon, hand sew that in place, and then I think I'm just going to add a little green ribbon at the side so that it looks like leaves. Then we'll start sewing it together. So that's how we're looking at the moment. I think that's really pretty. What I did on the original little sewing circle is to put some little seed beads just scattered around there and in the centre of the roses as well. I don't think it needs it on the large one. So I'm just going to leave that as it is. But if you've got some beads handy, stick them on there. Right, so this is the front section. And where the fold is there, I've actually transferred that marking onto the lining section here. So when that folds over, or if that was to fold over, that would be exactly the same size. Because when I sew this all together, I'm going to sew from one side to the other, just around there. Just on the lining section, you don't need to do that on the outside. What I'm going to do here though, is to mark the centre point of my outer fabric. I'm just lining up those two side folds there with an erasable ink pen, and I'm going to put a little piece of ribbon, that's a 2.5 inch piece of ribbon, around either side like so. So you could tack by hand if you prefer to, but on a little piece like this I don't think it's really necessary. Let's cut that off. Bend that around the other side. Try and make sure it's not twisted so that it's spaced evenly either side of the centre marking. Like so. And the reason for that is so that if you wanted to take this anywhere, you can actually fold the flap up and thread the back ribbon through the front ribbon, so you've got a little handle there and it keeps it closed. Right. We'll put that to one side for a moment and we'll carry on with the pocket, which I'm going to decorate with another piece of ribbon. So there's my fabric, which is folded in half. So this time, before I actually sew the pocket pieces together, I'm just going to sew that strip of ribbon across where the top would be. So that's where the crease is across the top. So open it up and then I'm going to sew the ribbon across here. So again, in the book, I just put a piece of lace across there. You don't have to decorate it with anything if you don't want to, but it just adds a little bit of embellishment. You may have noticed I'm using my 1/4 inch foot on the sewing machine as well. I find it easier to measure my seam allowances as I'm sewing by using that foot. Don't rush out and buy one if you don't have one. It's just rather useful if you do. Okay, so just sew down both sides. And we'll trim the ends of the ribbon away just so that it's not quite as bulky. And then let's make up the pocket. So fold it over right sides together. And we're going to sew down the sides, across the bottom, but leave a gap in the bottom so I can turn it the right side out. So a quick backwards before I go forwards. When you come down to the corner piece, leave the needle in the down position so that you can pivot that around and sew across the bottom. Quick reverse stitch there. Leave the gap in the bottom. That doesn't have to be exact, but around about 3 or 4 inches should be fine. And then back into the final corner around here and back to the top again. Then we will snip off the very corners just so that when I turn this the right side out, the points on my corners are that little bit more pointy. Careful not to cut through the stitches there. And we'll turn this through and I'll give it a press before it actually goes on the pocket, on the circle. Just use the wrong end of my pen just to push that corner out. There we go. Actually, I've no need to press that. I can just crease it with my fingers. So fold that in. No need to sew the opening closed because that's going to happen when the pocket goes on. So again, you can keep building this up and putting it back together again so that you know exactly how it's going to look. So that's the front, that's the back. So it's on this section that my pocket needs to go. So I like the pocket. You can see the 2 marks on the side there. Let me just take that one away, that's a bit confusing. So that's where the front of the pocket's going to sit, so that'll be there, the front pocket. And then I want this piece to sit so that I can just see the top of that ribbon poking through. Like that. Whatever you're putting in here, maybe you wanted to make the pockets a little bit bigger. Just make sure that it's not interfering with the seam allowance. You've got your 1/4 inch seam allowance all the way around. So if your pocket does end up being too wide, we don't want it being sewn into the seam. And actually it was the same with the rows on the front. Don't go too low because when the front and the back pieces are stitched together around here, again you've got that 1/4 inch seam allowance. So do bear all of that in mind if you're going off piste and creating your own design maybe. So I know exactly where that needs to be. Let me just sit it in the centre. You can measure and mark that if you prefer to. And we'll have a couple of pins in here and then I'll sew it in place. You could, if you wanted to, put a dividing stitch straight down the centre so you could make that into 2 pockets, but this one's just going to be 1. Then we will fix the stitch at the end. A couple of stitches backwards before you go forwards if you don't have a fixed stitch on your sewing machine. And we'll neatly sew all around the edge. So when I come across the bottom of the pocket, that's where the turning gap was. So that's why I didn't need to hand sew or sew that closed because it's closed now. Oops, one more stitch there, I think. That's it. And another lock stitch on the end there. Now I'm also going to put a piece of hanging ribbon on the top here. This can be as long as you like. So to mark the centre point, I'm going to fold this all in half and just crease with my fingers. make this into a loop and just tack it facing downwards over that crease mark. So tacking or basting just inside the seam allowance, up you go, so that you don't see those stitches. That's purely so that I don't have to pin that in place. Now we can start to put the whole thing together. So I'll need the front and the back of each piece being sewn right sides together, like so, and I need to sew from one of those marks to the other. So I'll just transfer the markings onto the back so I can see where I'm going. Just snip you off. So literally just around the top from there to there. And I'm going to make sure that my backing fabric is straight. Tuck you out of the way. There we go. And we'll do the same with these two sides. So again, right sides together. I've got the lump of the rose in the centre there, so I just need to make sure that I'm sewing around there neatly. And I'm going to sew from one of the crease marks around the top to the other crease mark. So we're like this. Then we need to sew these two pieces together. Just move you out the way. So open up the two sides, and then outside to outside, lining to lining. We're going to sew from the seam that I've just made here. So I'll pin those two pieces together because that's important that they meet. And we're going to sew all the way around the edge of the circle until we get back to these two seams which are meeting there. And then we'll do the same with the lining side, but on the lining side you need to leave a turning gap because I'll turn the whole thing inside out, the right side out in just a second. Okay, so from the stitch line that I've just finished here, right on top of that seam is where I'm going to start sewing. And sew all the way around the edge. You may find that your sewing machine starts to sound a little bit noisy now, and you may find that it drags a little bit because of the polyester fleece. The noise because it's so thick, and the dragging because of course it's quite rough, so it causes a little bit of friction. Not a problem, but I just thought I'd let you know. Right back up to that seam again. And then we'll flick these two pieces over, and right from that mark, that seam, we're going to sew around the other side. So start right on the top of that Y-shaped seam, And then when I come to the bottom, that's where I'm going to leave the gap. So around about 4 or 5 inches should do it. And then back round to the start. And again, when I come up to that seam, I'm going to stop exactly on the point where all of the other stitches meet and lock the stitches. Okay, so we've got 2 seams either side that look like crosses, like so. Now through the hole, put your hand inside. I'm not worried about clipping around curves on this because it's only a 1/4 inch seam allowance, so you should get a nice neat seam without clipping into it. Let's pull it all through. That's there. That's the bit with the rose on. That's the circle. And that's the lining. So where the gap is in the lining, I'm going to fold in the edges so that they meet, and then just put a row of top stitches across there. It's quite difficult actually to make the edges meet on a curve like this, but don't be too precious about it because this is right in the bottom of the lining, and I really don't think anyone's going to go delving inside there to check that your seam is perfect. That'll do. So let's just sew around here. Use the same colour thread normally so you don't really see the stitches, but again it's right on the bottom of the inside of the circle, so it won't really be seen. Right, let's move these pins out of the way. So we'll push the lining inside the circle. The front here is going to fold over. Like so. I'm going to cut another piece of ribbon to make a bow, just to decorate it. Just try and turn around the sides of the ribbon because this is printed on one side and I want all of the spots to face the same way. So I can just twist that around to make sure that they do. I'll need to just go and put the iron on because this is going to look so much better when it's all pressed. And then I'm going to hand sew the bow just to the middle and then it's finished. So now we're all finished. Doesn't it look different when you've actually pressed this? And again, you can use the technique of making those ribbon roses in any size you like. And I think what might have been quite nice would be to put some buttons across here to decorate and embellish it, but you can use your own imagination and whatever you have in your stash to create yours. I hope you enjoy making it.